If you're familiar with my videos or have even slightly dipped your toes into psychedelics and or spirituality, you have probably come across the term ego death. To experience an ego death means to completely lose your subjective self-identity. Everything you believe to be you, your name, your occupation, your personal qualities, etc., completely fly out the window. You forget all of that and you are left with just pure awareness. This is similar to what one might call a mystical experience and is a glimpse into Buddhist enlightenment or nirvana. It is impossible to fully understand what an ego death is like without having one. It's like explaining to someone how a food they've never tried before tastes. They can form a concept of what the taste would be like in their heads, but they can never truly know how it tastes until they try it for themselves. My main concern for this video is to explain why having an ego death experience can be beneficial for your life, because I don't feel like that gets elaborated on enough. So for this video, I'll be talking further about what exactly entails an ego death, how you can have one, misconceptions and concerns people have regarding ego death, and I'll tie all of that together by explaining why the ego death experience is even significant in the first place. Let's get into it. First of all, I want to say that the term ego death is kind of misleading. Death implies the complete ending of existence of something forever. When someone dies, they're gone forever. They don't come back. The better term for ego death would be ego dissolution or ego liberation, because the ego only temporarily goes away. Once the experience is over, it comes back. This state of being can be achieved through meditation, yoga, or psychedelic drugs. The experience may be slightly different based on method, but I'll explain more on that later. As I said at the beginning, an ego death is the complete shattering of your self-identity, and many people who have the experience usually don't fully realize the extent to what their self-identity is until they have it all fade away. A base level of identity would be identifying with your name, with being the child of your parents, parents of your children, friends with so-and-so. You also identify with whatever job you have, whatever your hobbies are, etc. What you don't realize is that at a core level, you identify with being alive. You identify as being a human on a giant spinning rock that flies around a giant ball of fire that's inside an enormous galaxy with billions of similar systems inside it. That's all encompassed inside an infinite, never-ending universe. Your human self also adopts the idea of trees being trees, rocks being rocks, and fish being fish. From an absolute objective standpoint, there's nothing inherent about the universe of a tree being a tree and a rock being a rock. Those are concepts the subjective self projects onto those things. So when you have an ego death and a sense of being a separate subjective self fades away, all of the identifications I just listed completely fly out the window. You forget all about them. A rock is no longer a rock because there is no self to project the idea of a rock being a rock onto the rock. The rock simply just is. And let's say when you're having this experience, you're at a beach, which I don't advise you to do, but let's just hypothetically say you're at a beach while you're having an ego death. What the ego does is it distinguishes among different objects. So in a normal state of mind, you might say, oh, that's a big gray rock. And oh, that's a slightly smaller, lighter gray rock. And oh, that's a pebble. Or oh, that's a giant boulder. During an ego death, you don't make these distinctions. You'd be absorbing everything in your plane of view from a completely raw state of consciousness. Everything is uniform and seems to meld together as one thing. And again, I can only explain to an extent what it's like if you haven't had this experience for yourself. But for those watching this who have had an ego death, you likely know exactly what I mean. So basically you're saying that you stop giving meaning to things during an ego death? I don't like that at all. I don't want to be in a state of meaninglessness. This is all pointless. That sounds depressing. While yes, you could say that you are in a state of meaninglessness while on a complete ego death, during the experience, you certainly are not dwelling on this lack of meaning. Only the ego gives meaning to things, so only the ego can perceive a lack of meaning. When the ego is gone, there is no meaning, nor a lack of meaning. Many people during this experience feel a sense of pure bliss and utter peace. They feel like everything is perfect because there is no ego to tell them that it's not perfect. The main reasons people seek this experience is for spiritual purposes. Someone coming from a more Buddhist way of thinking might be seeking enlightenment. Someone else might be seeking this experience in order to gain insights on how to live a happier, more fulfilled life by learning how to live in harmony with their ego. Someone else might just be curious about the nature of the universe in altered states of consciousness. Or maybe someone else is a combination of all three. There are a variety of reasons why somebody would seek this experience, and that an ego death can be beneficial to someone in numerous different ways. Personally, my desire to seek this experience stemmed from genuine curiosity. I wasn't seeking a benefit, and there wasn't much of a spiritual reason behind it. Once I had the experience, I turned very spiritual and now use psychedelics to achieve this state of being on occasion in order to gain insights on how to live peacefully alongside my ego. A lot of people view the ego as the enemy, but I think this way of thinking is wrong. You can't live without an ego. Having an ego is an integral part of being human. So if you enjoy life and want to continue living, the only choice you have is to accept the ego and live alongside it. I like to think of myself as just a pure, formless awareness that's identifying with a body and a mind, which is the ego. And the ego is a software that's been evolving for millions of years and is the reason for our consciousness experiencing reality the way it does. But because the ego is just a mind program, it isn't me. All I am is the awareness that is perceiving the software, and it wasn't until integration after my ego death experience that I came to realize this. And I'm still very attached to this human form. Don't get me wrong, I like it, and I'm not ready to let go of it. So my only option is to accept the ego, become its best friend, and work to live alongside it. But just the realization that the ego is separate from who I truly am has saved me so much future suffering, because only the ego suffers. And when you begin to detach yourself from the ego, you naturally suffer much less. So hopefully the examples I gave in my story helped you understand the whole point of even wanting to have an ego death in the first place. So now, I'm going to explain a couple different ways on how you can have this ego death experience. So as I mentioned back at the beginning, the three main ways of having an ego death are through meditation, yoga, and psychedelic drugs. They've also been known to just occur randomly to people, but that is extremely rare, and you really can't control that, so I won't talk about that. So out of the three methods I listed, I wouldn't say there is a best way to achieving an ego death experience, because at its core, any complete ego death is all the same state of being. But the ease and the quickness to achieving full liberation of the ego varies drastically depending on which method you use. If you've already been meditating for several years and take the practice seriously, and you've gotten great at focusing on your awareness without attaching to your thoughts, you might be able to slip into an egoless state of consciousness relatively easily. And the same goes for yoga. But if you're completely new to all of this and have never meditated or have never done yoga in a spiritual way your entire life, it could literally take you years before you ever get deep enough into the practice that your ego begins to dissolve. But also know, in order for the practice to have a positive impact on your life, you don't need to reach the completely transcendent, enlightened state of being in which 100% of your identity is gone. Meditating and or doing yoga the right way can bring insights that help you let go of aspects of yourself you previously thought were inseparable, but you don't have the full-blown ego death experience. It's just kind of a minor ego dissolution, not absolute. Also, this is what meditation and yoga for most people is. It's a more grounded, solid, calm spiritual practice that has immense benefit over time, rather than providing temporary glimpses of the completely transcendent state. Although very advanced meditators and people who do yoga, like Kundalini, totally can achieve this fully liberated, transcendent state. But if you really want quick access to that full-blown state of ego death, psychedelics are no doubt the easiest route to go. I like to think of psychedelics as psychotechnologies. They are tools we can use to explore our minds and gain insights on the nature of consciousness, and then we can take those insights and use them to improve our life. But because they are so powerful, they should only be used in moderation and taken with precautions. Personally, I only trip about 4 to 6 times a year because I don't see a need to do so any more than that. There are many different psychedelic substances, but there are 3 that are clearly the most popular, which is why I like to call them the Big 3. And these 3 substances are LSD, magic mushrooms, and DMT. And the way in which your consciousness is infiltrated by this partial or complete ego dissolution varies by substance. With LSD and mushrooms, ego death is slower, as the substance's effects don't peak until 2 to 3 hours after ingestion. So on the come up, you're slowly getting closer and closer to that complete ego liberation. You basically lose aspects of yourself until you're completely gone, and this can often be accompanied by a panic, as the ego recognizes a danger. But if you remain mindful and are not attaching to your thoughts, you won't experience as much panic, which is why being good at meditation definitely pays off in reducing panic during psychedelic trips. But smoking DMT is a completely different story. When someone smokes a decent dose of DMT, the ego fades away so fast that you can't even process what happened to you. Your ego is gone in the blink of an eye. So this might sound kind of bad, but basically ego death on LSD and mushrooms is like dying a slow death, whereas DMT is like being shot in the head. You die instantly. Of course, dose depends greatly on what your experience will be. You have to take a pretty high dose of whatever substance it is in order to achieve a full-blown ego death. Smaller doses will bring partial ego dissolution, but it will not be complete. I'm not going to go into dose here, I have other videos on that. You can look up that yourself. This is just the gist of ego death on psychedelics, and that pretty much wraps up this video. Hopefully you understand what ego death is now, and why people even seek the experience in the first place. If you want to support my work on a deeper level, consider joining my Patreon. I have all sorts of exclusive content, including a book club in which we read 1 book a month about topics we go over on this channel, mainly psychedelics and spirituality. For June, we are reading How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and so far the discussions have been poppin', so consider joining if you're interested. As always guys, have a great day, and peace.